Good afternoon, and welcome to today's installment of the OAH's Online Learning Professional Development Series. My name is Elizabeth Marsh, and I am the Director of Membership, Marketing, and Communications. These webinars are supported by a grant from the National Endowment for the Humanities and will be recorded and made available online. And now I'd like to introduce our moderator for today's webinar. Siegel is the Program Assistant for Digital Programming at the Organization of American Historians. She received her Bachelor's in History in 2021 from Indiana University and has worked with the OAH since the summer of 2019. She will be attending law school in the fall and will be focusing her legal education in a public interest program.
Thank you, Beth. So I will be introducing our panelists for today's webinar on networking. So first we have Zenaida Gould, who is the Executive Director at the Mexican American Civil Rights Institute in San Antonio, Texas. Prior to her work at the Institute, she served as the founding director at the Museo del West Side, which was a project of the Esperanza Peace and Justice Center in San Antonio, and as the lead curatorial researcher at the Institute of Texan Cultures in San Antonio. She received her bachelor's in American Studies from Smith College and her PhD in American Culture from the University of Michigan. Next, we are joined by Christine Lamberson, who is the director of the History Office at the Federal Judicial Center. After receiving her PhD in history from the University of Wisconsin, she worked as an assistant professor and then as an associate professor of history at Angelo State University. While at Angelo State University, she taught classes about U.S. legal and political history, violence in the U.S., and public history. She moved to the Federal Judicial Center in 2020. Finally, we are joined by Daniel Ronan, who is an arts, culture, and heritage professional based in Austin, Texas, where he's the principal of his firm, Resilient Heritage. He brings a decade of expertise in the nonprofit sector with experience working in museums, tourism, international relations, and community development corporations. Mr. Ronan started the Resilient Heritage firm in 2014 to showcase how arts, culture, and heritage organizations communicate their benefits to society. He does this through his service in tax credit consultation, fundraising, strategic planning, and public engagement for nonprofit arts, culture, and heritage organizations. So these are our panelists, and we're very glad to have them, and I'm sure we're going to have a wonderful discussion. But first, we're going to start with a little bit about each panelist, kind of their professional journey and the networking that they've done and how it has helped them. So we're going to go in reverse alphabetical order. So Daniel, if you would want to start, just a little bit about your professional career and your experience with networking.
Thanks, Sydney, and thanks so much for the opportunity to speak with you all today. I actually just moved to Austin, Texas from Chicago in December, so that's the accent. I'm originally from Portland, Oregon. I actually have an undergrad from the University of Oregon in planning, public policy, and management, and another in Romance languages. I come to this field just generally as a person who's interested in problem solving, and as such, I've taken on a Romance sort of sensibility of being a Renaissance man, and speak Spanish and French, as well as have participated in various nonprofit roles, from event organizing to fundraising to now tax credit syndication, working with nonprofits to help expand their organization headquarter buildings across the country, as well as strategic planning, helping organizations forecast into the future what they would like to do and how they would like to fulfill their missions. So I'm really interested in the conversation today, mainly because I'm actually poised to get back into academia myself, but have really been interested in networking all along, which has really brought me to these different organizations. I would say first off, I work for the community development nonprofit in Portland, Oregon, my hometown, Hacienda CDC, helping Latinos in small business entrepreneurship. Moving on to Chicago, I worked at the National Public Housing Museum, working in fundraising to talk about the history and legacy of public housing in the United States. And from there, since 2017, have been working on my own with clients, bringing together my skills around their needs. So really looking forward to the conversation and hearing about the other panelists and their work.
Christine, if you want to go ahead.
Sure. So my name is Christine Lamberson, and I, again, am currently the director of the history office at the Federal Judicial Center. But I started my career in a much more kind of traditional academic path. I got my PhD in 2012, and I went straight to Angelo State University, which is a small-ish, medium-sized maybe, teaching university in Texas. We are part of the Texas Tech system. And so I taught there. It was primarily a teaching position. I was lucky enough to get a tenure track job there straight out of grad school, though I did go on the job market for a couple of years in graduate school, and sort of at least at the time, fairly typical approach of apply for a few jobs when you could rush and get your dissertation done, and then kind of I had a lectureship that I did while I finished up a little more slowly and went on the job market again. So I did spend a lot of time at least trying to network as a graduate student during that period of time, thinking about trying to get a job, of course, an academic job, but also thinking about other kinds of positions, whether they be fellowships, short-term teaching jobs, or non-academic jobs, if that didn't work out. Then I went to Angelo State. I obviously worked there for a while. I got tenure there. I stayed a little while longer. While I was there, I was the co-director of a public history project funded by the NEH, and I did that for 4 years. And that is one of the reasons I sort of shifted into a different career area. I liked doing that work, decided I wanted to do more of a public history path. And so in, I guess, around 2018, 2019, decided I wanted to do that. And then I shifted to trying to build a different kind of professional network and also figure out where I wanted to go and what I wanted to do. So I spent a lot of time, really, especially during the summer of 2019, doing those famous informational interviews and talking to a lot of people about their careers, especially people who had PhDs in history or some similar field, but were not working in universities, or who were working in universities but not working as professors. And then started applying for jobs. That's what led me to this job. And I've been here since January of 2020. I wanted to answer your question a little bit. I've sort of already done that, but about kind of the role of networking in my career. And I would say that for me, the sort of first thought when I signed up for or was asked to be on this panel was, of course, the getting a job, because especially for graduate students, that's kind of the #1 thing we're all trying to do, I think, or we were, in my case, trying to do with our networking. So that's one, of course, and it has been important for me in thinking about job prospects too, but I'll mention kind of 2 other areas where it comes in. One is more in the kind of mentoring, making your work better. How do you think about your work? How do you make your project stronger? If you're writing a dissertation or a book, all of that kind of stuff. And then the third that I think has been really important to my career, but is perhaps often overlooked, is meeting people to do things like put on programs. When I was the co-director of the public history project, we had an event series, and bringing people in to speak was a really important part of that program. Getting people to be advisors or on kind of advisory boards, things like that, getting kind of expertise for that type of project. My job now, sometimes, we need external speakers. Building those kinds of networks, or building networks to do that kind of work, is also incredibly important. And I think something that you really want to start doing early, and that will serve you well if you have that kind of network in the long run. So I'll leave it there for now.
Thank you. And Sarah, if you want to go ahead.
Sure. So my professional journey, really from the outset, when I applied to grad school, I knew I wanted to go into museum work. As an undergrad, I had a couple of internships at the Smithsonian. And actually, when I finished undergrad, I was a little torn, because on the one hand, I was very interested in museums. On the other hand, I was also very interested in community advocacy. And my senior year, I was an intern at the National Office of LULAC, or the League of United Latin American Citizens. And so I was trying to, sort of think about community advocacy, but also museum work. And the best advice I got from my advisor was, you don't need to make a decision. So I just went to work for a nonprofit in New York and learned about fundraising. So I did fundraising for about 3 years. And in that time, figured out that I did in fact want to go the museum route. And so applied to PhD programs, but again, my letters were all about, I want to go into museum work. As an undergrad, I had talked to curators at the Smithsonian about what do I need to do to carve this kind of career path out. And they had advised that it was getting much more competitive. And so PhD was probably going to be a leg up. So while I was in grad school, I was also doing internships and fellowships at museums and historical societies and that sort of thing. So building relationships outside of academia, which I knew was going to be important for what I wanted to do. And it's a good thing I did that, because when I finished school, even though this was a long time ago, that was when people were really starting to notice that there was a dip in academic jobs. So unfortunately, I'm sorry, things have not changed in the last 10 years. But I've started looking for ideas of where to go. And during one of my fellowships, I met a professor who was at the same research institution as me, who was based where I am now, San Antonio. And I was asking her, like, what is the job situation in San Antonio? Because I'm originally from Texas. I'm not from San Antonio, but I'm from Texas and I like San Antonio. And she was like, well, we've got all these universities. So worst case scenario, you come and you adjunct. But we also have museums and all these other things. So I moved here and ended up signing up to take the volunteer training at a museum where I could imagine myself working, although they didn't have any openings at that time, at least nothing posted, right? I did the volunteer training, was getting ready to sign up for so many volunteer hours a week. And then actually they offered me a short-term contract just to do a one-off exhibit. And I did that, and that led to another contract. I will say that was not a living wage. What I did in order to supplement that was I did introduce myself via email to some professors and got some adjunct work out of it. So I was combining part-time museum work with part-time adjuncting until eventually that did lead to a full-time museum job. I stayed at that museum for about 7.5 years. But really crucial to that was that at the same time that I was working there, I was also doing a lot of volunteering in the community and just meeting people in the city that I adopted. It is those connections that led to the next 2 jobs, including being asked to come and set up a community museum here in San Antonio, and then now my current job as executive director of the Mexican American Civil Rights Institute. So I really think you don't have to network within, sort of professional structures like OAH conferences, although I'm sure you can do that too. But I mean, you can do it in the community too. So there's different paths for that. But I mean, at least for me, the volunteering, being on nonprofit boards, I've served on a lot of nonprofit boards, and that has been just a way to meet people in a lot of different areas, but also to demonstrate to people what your expertise and capabilities are, and then just also consider, if you're thinking alt-ac at all, that sure there's OAH and ASA and all these other primarily academic organizations, but there's also ones that are not entirely geared towards academics, although they're welcome too. But I'm thinking about National Council on Public History, the American Association of State and Local History. If you're interested in archives or museums, most regions and states have their own regional or state organizations on top of the national organizations. So it doesn't just have to be the kind of traditional academic organizations.
Yeah, actually, this feels like a great way to segue into some discussion if Daniel wants to pitch in, and then we can,
Okay, great. Sorry, I know we're going to get right to it, but let me go into the networking piece. So I would love to dovetail off of Sarah's comments about board service. So I think boards are a really great way to volunteer and be a decision maker. And I think that's really critical. It's great if you want to do volunteer work. I think it's really fulfilling, but at the same time, you don't necessarily want to lose, I think, tempo in your career by putting yourself in a situation where you're volunteering and people just think you're doing the kindness of your heart. So just keep that in mind. What I've been able to do, and actually, Sarah, I think we crossed paths before through Latinos in
Heritage Conservation.
Heritage Conservation, yes. So I got really involved when I moved to Chicago in preservation, and I got on the board of DOCOMOMO, the Documentation and Conservation of the Modern Movement Chicago chapter, and really into architecture and the built environment. Also worked for museums, so I was able to become a member of the International Council of Museums US Committee, where I still sit as a board member. But there I've been able to network with museum directors from across the country, and as the youngest member by like 15 years, I really think it behooves people coming out of grad school and younger folks, really anyone under 40, please, anyone, to reach out and apply to these opportunities, because there are so many, I think, leaders who are expected to join boards, and that's sort of like the pipeline. But I think as what I've learned as sort of a generalist being in economic development, history, arts and culture, is that really it's about not being a disruptor, but being a convener of different perspectives and getting other people involved. So the more that you can do that and really bring people that you wouldn't maybe normally consider to be within that domain or sector, really, I think adds additional perspective that enhances the work of everyone involved. That said, they can't be like an engineer. Maybe they can, I don't know, but an engineer at a history conference might have something to say, but make sure that there's at least some connection and try and foment that and foster additional connections. And the one thing, and I'll just say this as someone who moved here to Austin like 2 months ago, I'm very serious about networking, and I would actually call it building community. Because I think there are some negative connotations that come with networking as someone who's like maniacal or, building a grand plan. Really, everything that I've done in life has sort of been me falling into it. And that's because I've learned to meet a lot of people in many different contexts, like our two other speakers have been saying, and really just get to know the community I'm in. So I've met with 55, I have a spreadsheet, I'm very organized. You don't have to be, but that's just how I do it. Met 55 different leaders from around the community, from the Austin Parks Foundation to the Blanton Art Museum here in town, several different organizations that I would like to have a somewhat of a connection to as a community member, but also, if somebody were to come out of that business-wise, as a consultant, I would love that. However, I would caution that if you are a consultant, you shouldn't lead with that, right? Because some people, they get pitched all the time, and you want to be sure that you're not getting off this sort of for only $29.99 attitude, because people will put up the wall pretty quickly. So that's just something that I've learned, and I think it's really done. It's done me well in terms of building a networking group that I can then sort of insert myself in and find different opportunities.
Thank you. Yeah, I feel like this is a really great way to start the conversation, because I think it gets at something that's going to be a central theme throughout this webinar, is that there's a variety of different ways to network, and trying to find the right path for you, is kind of a personal situation. But also trying to find the right avenue through which to connect people can be difficult. And I think that actually leads really great to a question we have from Nicole Gibson, which is, how can I optimize LinkedIn and other social media networks? And I'm actually going to open this a little bit bigger to, should you optimize your networking through LinkedIn, through social media? What are some of your guys' takes on social media and, connecting through that method? And anyone can go ahead and start.
I can start. So we were talking a little bit about this before. I doubt that my LinkedIn is optimized. I have a LinkedIn and other social media. Probably from a networking perspective, I would say LinkedIn is the most useful for me for various reasons. Things like Twitter and other social media are not really my thing, especially for networking. But I would say that a couple of things. I am certainly not using LinkedIn to the best of its ability to create a network. However, I do think it's still useful for me for a few things. In particular, as you move out of graduate school and get further and further away, or further and further away, perhaps graduate school shouldn't be the metric, but as you move from one community to another and you move further away from a particular network, you're not going to be checking in with everybody you kind of knew, every month or year or anything like that. And most of us probably don't send out, announcements of every time we move. So if you are interested in moving into a new field, or you apply for a job somewhere or an internship somewhere, looking at something like LinkedIn and checking to see, wait, did someone I went to graduate school or that I used to know in that community actually have some connection to this place? Is there some other alum? Those kinds of things I think it can be really useful for. In fact, I just had a conversation with someone not that long ago who looked me up that way and said, oh, I see you're here now. I was wondering if I could talk to you about that. And I think that those kinds of platforms can be really useful for just sort of keeping in touch with people in that way, where you can kind of check in and see where they're at and see if there might be someone who could, be a contact, be someone that you could spend a few minutes talking to if you're looking to move to a new city or a new place or get to know a new field.
I might jump in. So the first thing I'm just fresh off of moving here. So the first thing I did was look up all of the organizations I wanted to have anything to do with, and I signed up for all of their newsletters. So, I mean, if you're really interested in like getting a mesh with the community and wanting to find out more about, what the environment, what the ecosystem is, I think it's a really great way to see what's going on and to also track where your interests, might come alive when you see an event or when you see an opportunity. Also, with regards to LinkedIn, I think it's really how you use it. And, as someone who runs his own firm, I haven't really taken advantage of the LinkedIn page feature where you can actually put your business on the page and have, I'm not selling widgets. So it's kind of a different type of, I think, development of showing everyone kind of who you are and what you're about. I've spent a lot of time on my website in terms of pushing people to that resource. So maybe what I found to be the most effective is actually linking your website directly from your LinkedIn, which sounds basic, but I think it's a really good tool because then you can actually track analytics through Google Analytics and you can see where folks are coming from when they look at your website, how long they're looking at certain pages. So it's also, you want to be sure or better informed rather of the types of people you're engaging on the back end, so you can better present yourself the way you would like to be perceived.
And I don't think I've ever cold introduced myself to somebody via LinkedIn or social media, but what I have found to be effective, both in terms of me building my network and in terms of people reaching out to me and me not feeling weirded out about it, was that I, for example, attended somebody's talk or even, saw them at some, in my world, we go to a lot of galas, met them, briefly for 5 minutes at a gala or something, and then followed up with some kind of LinkedIn message or social media message to say, it was nice, chatting with you for all of 5 seconds whenever Wednesday. I am interested in learning more about your work. I've also had students reach out to me and say that they had run across my work and here's something that they're working on that they wanted me to know about. And in that case, I've actually met several students who I've now written like letters of recommendation for, just because over the couple of years, I got to know their work relatively well. And so, you know, in that case, I think I didn't feel that weird about it. I will just say, I don't know, I think I'm just of a slightly older age. So sometimes when people just sort of cold reach out to you, I just think they're trying to sell me something. And you know, so I don't necessarily immediately think, you know, this is somebody I want to, I don't know, respond to. But if there's some kind of like, you know, we were both at this workshop, or I don't know, that at least makes me feel like there's some reason that maybe we might have a reason to talk.
Can I add to that real fast? Because someone who has coldly reached out to people, rather reached out, not coldly, but, you know, did a cold call, or I don't even know how to say that, but reached out in the cold on LinkedIn. What you don't want to do is just reach out and not say anything, because that happens to me all the time. And I'm just like, so who is this person? How do I know them? So, you know, at the very least, just say, hi, my name is, or, you know, I was interested in the research that you're doing, or, you know, I'm interested in a position at XYZ museum, library, who knows, like, but you got to say something, right? Like, it's just like someone on the street saying hello to you. You're not going to be like, oh, hi, how are you? How's your day? I mean, you wouldn't do that in a normal conversation. So that, and I'm a little bit analog as well, even for maybe being younger. I'm 33 next month, but hello. I write postcards. I write postcards to everyone I meet. So some people do think it's weird that I ask for their address at times, but I typically send it to their work address. And, you know, it's another way to stand out, I think, and to show someone that you really did appreciate their time and you took the time to show your appreciation. But at the very least, an email 1 to 2 days later, you know, saying, hey, I really value your time and would love to keep you up to date with the things I'm doing here in town, and you know, would appreciate it if you kept me in mind for any opportunities you might see, assuming that you did talk about that in the conversation that you had with that person. So those are some other strategies.
Okay, so I think we will do a slight pivot away from, you know, social media and networking, but we will most likely return at least in some way back to this conversation in a few minutes. But first we have a question from Claire Boyle, who is currently an MA history student, and she's working part-time as an events membership coordinator at a Washington, DC based cultural nonprofit where she had previously interned. She's looking to pursue her PhD, but wanted to know if you guys have any recommendations for networking as an MA to hopefully PhD to help figure out what she would actually like to do with her degree. She doesn't know if she wants to teach. What are some other opportunities that a grad student can pursue for positions if they end up going for a PhD? Any advice, any options?
Well, I can start. I would like to just make a shameless plug for the American Association of State and Local History. If you can come either to an in-person or virtual workshop or conference for AASLH, the reason I'm plugging that is that a lot of the folks who come to AASLH work in a variety of areas within that larger umbrella field of history. So at a place like that, you could hear people who are archivists, librarians, school history teachers, you know, K through 12 history teachers, as well as museum folks, people who are in the education side of museums, people who are in the collection side of museums. So you can kind of get a sense of what is the kind of work that different people are doing within this larger field of history and what within that might appeal to me. Similarly, NCPH is a good place for that too.
I have something, if Christine, I don't know if you had something to add. Okay, so I'll say I'm a little bit more on the practitioner side of things. I moved to Austin to attend the LBJ School of Public Affairs. So I'll either be starting this fall or next. I haven't really decided yet. That said, you know, I come from working in organizations with many hats, which is basically nonprofit work. So I would maybe take a look at what you have done and what you would generally be okay with doing, because ultimately I'm not sure your life happens that you're always going to get into the dream role that you've always wanted. And if that works out, cool. But I think the more we can be flexible in the nonprofit history space, I think the better. And ASLH is definitely a great conference to go to. I just went to the one in Little Rock in September and highly recommend it for the networking opportunities in particular. If you do events, could you develop your skill set in fundraising to do fundraising events? I mean, these are just different ways to think about it. You're an MA history student, Claire. So, I mean, is there a certain type of history that you like? What types of organizations does that, could you possibly work for? Museums, libraries, the state governments. I mean, here in Texas, there's a lot of money for history professions in particular, and state jobs are pretty good by comparison to a lot of nonprofit jobs. So just thinking, I think keep your options open. PhD is a big commitment, and not to knock folks like Sarah that have one, but that's a long time to be in school, and so if that's something you really want to do, go for it. But there are other pathways, I think, beyond that terminal degree, and it need not be a PhD. It can be a PhD and more practitioner-based work. I have a certificate in nonprofit management from the University of Illinois at Chicago. I found that was really invaluable to my development as a nonprofit leader, and actually helped me to start my own consulting firm, because I learned sort of a little bit more of the under the hood type work that went on at nonprofits. So I think just being open to different avenues, because as I understand it, you're still sort of deciding about that PhD. That would be my suggestion.
I'll add a little bit. I would second that point. If you're deciding whether or not to get a PhD, think hard about whether that's the path you want to take or not. I have no regrets about getting a PhD by any means, and I have a job where it's required at the moment, and for that matter, all of my jobs that has been the case. But there are, many things you might want to do that don't require a PhD, and you could spend that time doing something else, which leading to my second thought, one of the downsides of a PhD is you don't make a lot of money, if any, while you're getting them. But if you are getting one, I would spend some time doing exactly what you're doing right now in your MA, which is trying to work part-time, which you probably will have to do, and try to whatever extent you can to pick jobs that will help you think about what you want to do. So you mentioned, for instance, that you're not sure if you want to teach. Try and teach early on so that you can kind of get a sense of whether teaching is something that you like doing. I certainly knew people in graduate school who didn't end up teaching or being a teaching assistant till fairly late, and very quickly once they started doing it, realized that they did not want to teach, and that was not going to be a good career path for them. So that, you may find you don't like to be a teaching assistant and still want to teach eventually. There are all sorts of possibilities, but spending some time carefully choosing part-time work when you can, or carefully choosing the way you're being funded, assuming that you do need to work in order to be funded, and trying to make the most of those opportunities is one way to think about both building skills and building a resume in order to get a job, but also what kind of job it is that you want to get at the end of that process.
Thank you. I personally, that felt very helpful. So I'm hoping Claire got the same satisfaction from it. But if you have a follow-up question or any other questions, please do put them in the Q&A. We are going to switch topics yet again because Mia Michael has a question. So they are a PhD candidate in Boston, originally from downstate Illinois. So they state, it looks like you all have been flexible and open to moving across state or around the country. How did you prepare yourself mentally and materially to be able to make the physical movements that you did? Any advice to offer about making that move physically and mentally?
I can just say, yeah, honestly, when I was in grad school, it took me 7.5 years to do, I went into grad school without a master's. So I did my master's and my PhD in 7.5 years. And I moved 9 times during that time because I would get a 1 semester fellowship somewhere and then I was driving across the country to go and do that. And then I would get a 1 semester fellowship somewhere else and I was driving across. So actually when I finished grad school and I moved to San Antonio, I've been so thankful that I haven't moved. I've just been here because it is a pain. And depending on what your field is, I mean, I think it's probably different in academia, but if you're in public history, so much of what you do is about building trust with whatever community you're working with. And so that just takes time. And it just takes a lot of you being present. And so if you are gonna, think about, well, maybe I wanna do, this project in this state, and then I wanna do this other project somewhere else, it's gonna take time to build those networks. I think maybe now we're more accustomed to talking to people this way, virtually. So maybe that's made things better. But yeah, the moving is really exhausting.
As someone that just moved, I can attest it is. I drove a U-Haul from Chicago to Austin. One thing that you may not know of, it's a more logistical thing, but U-Haul has a rideshare program, or share the load program, share the load. Basically what that means is you can actually take someone's like box truck or just a box car basically of their stuff down from wherever to wherever, and they will actually reimburse you for doing that off of the cost of the truck that you rented. So that's a way to make a move affordable. But as someone who, both my parents were in the Air Force, so I moved around a lot growing up, it's a lot, and you kind of just get used to it. I've lived with boxes my whole life. They're like my family. But I think in general too, the mental preparation, I think, is to, one, I think it's always good, regardless of when you're, working via email with your work email, to always make mental note of that. And actually, if you need to email your personal email contacts from your job, as long as you're not in violation of any contract that you signed. So like, I've always done that. If I want to keep tabs on someone, I've emailed myself that information. And that's a good way to sort of track the folks that you really want to stay in touch with. Because I know sometimes when you change jobs or whatever, you sometimes regret not having kept some of those connections. And I think going back with what Sarah said, it's very, I think, work that's based on trust, history, and building those relationships, especially if you're like an oral historian. I mean, you can't just plop down and just extract information from people, right? You have to build that relationship. Another thing I wanted to say too was, I think it's super critical for us to think about ways we can really grow relationships even in our absence. And so something that I've always done, this is me, Analog Daniel, at the end of the year is I have a going list of the people that, of all the places I've lived, which is now 4 places in 15-ish years. I send New Year's cards, actually. I don't like to send holiday cards because they just get lost in the commotion and everything. So if you send a New Year's card, it's a way to sort of connect with those people, both personally and professionally, as you see fit. So that's another way, I think, to maybe lessen, as you say, the mental, prepare yourself mentally, or the mental trauma, if you will.
I will add to this a little bit. I find this question difficult, I would say, partially because I'm not sure that I successfully prepared for moving across the country multiple times. And so it would be great to have someone answer this question who felt like they really, did it incredibly well. But I think, I often thought when my dad's an academic, my brother's an academic, I have a fairly large, I knew what I was getting into when I became an academic, so to speak. And which is to say, when I went to graduate school, with with the complete plan to be a professor, or at least the complete hope, I should say. I will say that the rest of my family members are in different fields where your ability to get a job in those fields as an academic is a little more likely. So that part was a little bit different, but I went with that plan. And when I went, I thought, I'm happy to live anywhere. It doesn't matter to me. And it turns out I thought really differently about that at the age of 30 than I did at 22. I don't know why. Occasionally I think it's a bad system that we have ourselves picking the rest of our life choices at the age of 22. So, it felt different to say, okay, when I was, applying for academic jobs, everyone that comes up, you're like, can I imagine myself living in this place? Is this going to work for me? Is this going to be a place where I can be happy for the rest of, my life potentially, right? That's kind of how academic jobs often work. Not as much now as it used to be, but still. So it's hard. And I think that it's worth thinking about, and perhaps to return to that question from someone about whether you should get a PhD, think about that if that's something that you want to sign up for if you want to go into that academic world. Also, more people end up moving more times. I haven't moved a ton of times. So that does not answer your question, just says that it's hard. But I would say a couple of things in terms of actually mentally preparing. I still have an extremely strong network of people from graduate school. That happens to be where mine's from. Yours could be from somewhere else. But for example, I have a writing group of people from my graduate program. We're currently on break for personal life reasons, so to speak, some things have gotten in the way, but more or less meet every month or two, for years. And I think kind of maintaining some of that kind of network wherever that's from, and that's not a geographically focused, and it wasn't geographically focused before the pandemic either, kind of network that provides me with kind of a professional, not support group in a like therapy sense, but a professional group that reads my work and that we bounce ideas off of each other and things like that. And so kind of building stable networks, even if you are moving from place to place, is really important. So figure out a way to do that. Secondly, I also think some of the kinds of flexibility we've been talking about here, if I may speak for the other folks, but in terms of career path and kind of leaving your options at least open a little bit, I think can be important. Because, part of the reason that or let me put this differently, I took a different approach when I decided that I was going to move out of academia than, of course, at the beginning when I was applying out of graduate school. Out of graduate school, my threshold was, could I live here, right? That was the threshold for applying for a job. When I decided to move out of academia, I picked where I wanted to live, much more similar to the other two folks here, and then tried to build a network there and tried to think about what kinds of positions would be a good fit for me in this location. So kind of there's different ways to do it. And I think thinking about your kind of personal priorities and what's going to fit with your life is important to do before kind of signing up for doing those moves. Because of course, I recognize that I have been fairly lucky in the sense that sort of from a family and financial perspective, I've been able to handle those moves. But you want to kind of decide whether you're prepared for whatever reasons to do that. And if you're not, then think about ways to build a career that doesn't involve having those kinds of moves.
And I might say something that could help you do that. I like Christine's point. You have to know if it works or not, and it's better to know at the front end than the back end, because then that's just more healthcare costs that you don't need. And I think all of us should be, should have someone to talk to, right? So whether that's your family, I would advocate for, a counselor. I think it's really healthy. Mental health, inside, outside of academia, mental health for everyone is, we've seen in the past, 2 years with the pandemic, we have to be better as Americans in general, just managing our feelings, our emotions, but also our stress. And I think that's super critical. One thing to maybe reduce the number of moves, I know Sarah talked about fellowships. and she was moving across the country, and that's awesome. Some people maybe can't do that with, you know, family concerns, or, you know, maybe they're stretched too thin as it is. There are opportunities out there for non-resident fellowships, right? So you can actually have these fellowships. They're a little less, I think, than the resident fellowships on campus and other places, but a really good resource. And I'll send this to Sydney, is Pro Fellow. It's a great website that showcases lots of different opportunities for fellowships around the world, actually, with a focus on the United States. But really great resource that can showcase, you know, I think the different areas that you can go into when it comes to this fellowship. So just keep an eye on that, and look into the schools individually, that, you know, whether you're a historian or someone who's in this group who might be a journalist who likes history. I mean, there are different types of fellowships: journalism fellowships, history fellowships, arts and culture based ones. I mean, they're everywhere. So I just think be open, and, you know, get Googling as well. Set up Google alerts, so you don't have to do it every day. They can just come to you, and you can delete them, or, you know what, like, just whatever. Anyway, that's just off the top of my head.
Can I add one other quick thing? This is less about kind of how to move, but something I think both Sarah and Daniel mentioned is the type of work they're doing relies in part, or like oral history work, for example, relies in part on having a local network. When I was at Angelo State, the public history project that I did had an oral history component, and I was there for a while, so I certainly built a local network, but not to the extent that it sounds like Sarah has, for example, and certainly not to an extent that made me sort of embedded in the local community to the extent that many other people were there, which is to say that, you know, Angelo State was a place where there were lots of people, including lots of professors who say had gone to the university themselves, who had really deep local connections. You know, even being there for almost 8 years, I didn't have quite that level of connections. And I would just put in a plug for what I'll call partnerships, which might be another just slightly different category of networking and building community, which is to say that, you know, I built connections and partnerships with professors at my universities and state professors at Sul Ross University, which is another university in the region, but a little ways away, where I maybe didn't have all the connections, but I worked with people where I brought one thing to the partnership. For example, my oral history training, and they brought some community connections, and then we could work together to build a successful project. So if you're looking for that kind of, or trying to surmount that kind of challenge once you move, you can build your network slowly and find relationships and partnerships that can be mutually beneficial.
Thank you all so much. As a person who's currently facing a moving decision, this was very helpful. But we have one more question from the crowd. So this is from Peggy Ann Brown, and they ask, as far as networking, have you ever cold emailed the author of an academic book or an article that was useful to you? And I'm actually going to open this a little bit broader to how do you choose the people you contact? You know, how do you choose a potential mentor or a contact? So please answer both of those questions if you can.
I was just talking, but I guess I can go again. I can't 100% remember if I have entirely, in part because I am also a host for the New Books in History podcast, which is essentially built on cold emailing authors about their books. So it's in the exact context that you're asking. I'm having a hard time remembering, but I have in many frequently for other reasons. I also have had someone email me about an article and was absolutely thrilled. So now that might be different if you're sort of, you know, somebody who's written, you know, a book that's being reviewed in the Washington Post or something. I don't know how they feel about it, but I would say do it. Absolutely email someone and let them know I enjoyed your article or I enjoyed your book. I don't really see a downside to doing that. I would generally say that I think going along with my personal approach to networking, that I would send that email without the expectation that this person will now be my mentor. And I will say that, you know, when someone has emailed me in that sense, it would be much more likely at the stage in my career that I was, that that person would be my mentor instead of the reverse. So I don't think that those emails are always intended to be that kind of direction. But I think that there is hardly ever harm to reaching out to someone and telling them that they're doing good work, right? There's not enough of that in the world, and they might be a good connection. They could become a good mentor for you. You could become a mentor for them. It could be someone who you know, wave to at a conference. You know, maybe you can share resources. Maybe it's just an email, and you know, you make someone feel good about their work for the day. It's not a real there's no downside to that in my view.
Yeah, I might say that a good rule of thumb is like, if you would be annoyed at an email, then you probably shouldn't have sent the email. I mean, but, or, you know, the number of emails, I wouldn't send like 80 million, but, you know, and some people don't necessarily want to respond. And that's something that, you know, kind of hurts my ego a little bit, quite frankly, but, you know, you just got to get over it and keep going. And that's been a response. I can count on one hand how many people have done that to me, but I think it's really, you know, the mentorship piece comes later, right? You don't ask people via email, can you be my mentor? I mean, it's like, I don't even know who you are. Like, you know, like, but that said, you know, I've served as a, you know, career mentor for folks that are getting into preservation. And part of it is just like being a good listener, right? And making sure that they're aware of different resources that, you know, they may not have heard of or seen yet. But honestly, I think part of what's great networking is just being a good resource for others. And, you know, people work in a certain area of history, great. Send them events, send them books, send them, you know, timely news articles that have to do with those topics. So one, you're kept, you know, top of mind for them, but also you're not seen as just someone who's always wanting something from them, because that can be draining. So just kind of helping create that positive upward spiral of, you know, let's, you know, do this together. I think that's a really great way of fostering that community I was talking about earlier. One thing, while I have like the mic, I would also say, and Sarah made mention of this earlier, that I think it's a good idea. I was very involved at the Illinois Association of Museums, went down to Springfield, as well as the American Alliance of Museums, where I'm still a member. I'll be participating later this month in the Museums Advocacy Day. I think being an advocate is critical in this field. I mean, you guys are in history, so I think it's really important that, you know, as much as many of you may be academics, that you also get out on the street and you do some advocacy. You know, it doesn't have to be all out like campaigning for someone. Like, you know, I campaigned for the mayor of Chicago, now mayor of Chicago, as well as Obama back in the day. But, you know, really, if you believe in this, I think it's critical that we push our representatives for more funding for arts, culture, humanities, NEA, IMLS, NEH. So I would encourage you to also network in that realm as well, because not only are you getting to know the advocates in your field who are advocating for more funding, you're also getting to know your representatives, which I think is crucial to supporting your institutions and supporting all of us as change makers in history, if you will.
And if I could just say, just because this is sort of my Achilles heel, my inbox is always overflowing. My to-do list is always overflowing. So if somebody doesn't get back to you right away, it's not that they're not interested or that they're not nice. It may just be that they're really overwhelmed. So maybe just, you know, give them some time. Don't just be like, hey, I sent you an email, where's the response? But also, if you do send them a message via LinkedIn, this has happened to me. If you use Gmail, your Gmail might be set up so that it sort of separates promotional emails or something. And if they come from LinkedIn, they might go in there. And maybe you're prioritizing kind of the non-promo things. And so you may not see that LinkedIn message for a month or something. So just recognize that, again, it's probably not you if they don't respond.
Thank you. And I think that's actually going to wrap up our webinar. So if you guys have any last minute, pieces of advice or information that you want to get out there, now is the time. But if not, we can also just wrap up and be done. Okay, all right, then let's go ahead and say thank you to our panelists for an amazing conversation that I got a lot out of, and I hope everyone else did as well. Thank you so much for taking the time to do this and for partaking in one of the professional development webinars of the OAH. And for all of the attendees, please make sure to keep an eye out for future professional development webinars because we will have more. So
thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Good luck, everybody.
We'll see you soon.
Have a good rest of your week. Bye.